Ordinance Advisory Committee. Mr. Del Castillo, can we please start with the roll call?
Good morning, everybody. Yes. Ms. Popkin? Not here. Mr. Bering? Here. Here. Mr. Hall? Here. Mr. Reeves?
Morning. Here.
Morning. Ms. Bagley is out. Vice Chair Blair? Here. And Chair Hampton?
Present.
Perfect.
And Mr. McGregor is online, or?
And Mr. McGregor, not present.
Thank you, Mr. Del Castillo. And I believe I saw Commissioner Kingston is online with us. Do we have any other commissioners in attendance today? I think that's all. Thank you for being with us, our commissioners, to listen to the discussion. So we have 2 items on our agenda today. We have a number of registered public speakers. The agenda items are related, so we will be having our discussion on those items together. We are going to begin our meeting. Mr. Doss is going to read the items into the record. We do have staff here to answer some questions with some time constraints. So we're going to start with questions for our staff members and then have our public comments. For members of the public joining us today, the meeting format does begin with the staff briefing, discussion by our members. We're going to allow 1 hour for public speakers today. Each speaker will be receiving 1 minute. And as a reminder, please begin with your name and address for the record. For any of our speakers who are joining us virtually, you will need to have your camera on for us to be able to hear from you today. I also wanted to acknowledge the letters received regarding this matter. Staff has been processing those, and those have been distributed to all the committee members. We have received a number in the last 24 hours, and those are being distributed as quickly as we can get them processed. So with that, Mr. Doss, if you could please begin by reading the item into the record. And before you do that, I'd like to acknowledge Commissioner Stannard is also online with us today. Mr. Doss.
Thank you. Good morning, committee members. I think we will need to speak up a little bit. It's a little bit hard to hear y'all. I'm not really sure why, but we'll see if we can get that fixed. So we do have 2 items this morning. We have the item we've been discussing. This is DC. I'll read them both into the record, and then we'll discuss them together. And we can, if the committee desires to act on both items, they can act on them together or separately, however the committee wants to move forward. So item number 1, case DCA 212-002, consideration of amending chapters 51 and 51A of the Dallas Development Code, with consideration to be given to amending section 51-4.216.1 lodging uses and section 51A-4.205 lodging uses to define a new use called short-term rental lodging and related regulations. Item 2 is case DCA 212-010, consideration of amending chapters 51 and 51A of the Dallas Development Code, with consideration to be given to amending section 51-4.217 accessory uses and section 51A-4.217 accessory uses to define a new use called home sharing or accessory home sharing and related regulations. So those are the 2 items, and if Chair will allow me, I'll proceed with my presentation.
If we might ask you to hold, because I think we have a time constraint on one of our staff members who are here today. So we will be back to you shortly. And I want to thank Ms. Anderchuk for being with us today with data analytics. Some of our members had asked for some questions regarding the 2021 memo. Ms. Anderchuk, could you give us some information on that?
Absolutely. Good morning. I hope you can hear me. Good morning, commissioners. Thank you so much for having me. My name is Dr. Britta Anderchuk, and I serve as the Chief Data Officer for the City of Dallas and the Director of the Office of Data Analytics and Business Intelligence. I am here this morning to answer any questions that you may have about the short-term data analysis white paper that my team published in May of 2021. With the chair's permission, I just want to give you a minute of background to explain what we were asked to do and highlight a few key findings and limitations. So the first thing is that then's Assistant City Manager, Joey Zapata, asked our office to work on an analysis related to STRs alongside the task force that was assembled. There were 4 primary analyses laid out for us to look at. The first was a question of, do STRs create more nuisance calls than other types of properties, the non-STRs? Were property values of nearby properties impacted? Were short-term rentals, primarily owned by investors? And then the impact of STRs on affordable housing stock. So first of all, the paper takes no policy position on what should be done. The challenge with any analysis like this is that we almost never have ideal data, and we need to use data that is as close as we can get. So that being said, the task force worked hard to assemble a list of calls that they thought were most indicative of a problematic property or a nuisance call, and we utilized those. I can talk about those if you like. But what we found was that 90% of all STRs had no nuisance calls associated with that address, and that the 10% that did have calls looked similar to non-STR properties, meaning they did generate some 311 and 911 nuisance calls, but that observed difference was 1 call a year. And I need to explain that this difference was an intentional overestimation on our part. And what I mean by that is this. We assumed that every call that came to an address was correctly attributed to that address. So for example, if a parking complaint were to come in, it's hard to know, is that for this address? Is it for the address across the street or down the street? There's no way for us to determine that from the data. So we maximized the potential impact and assumed that every call was attributable to that address. The second assumption that we needed to make was we didn't know whether or not that address was in use as an STR at the time. And so we again made an assumption. We overestimated and assumed that the property was in use at the time of the call. We didn't have a way to verify this from the data. So with those 2 over-assumptions, right, we have essentially produced a very conservative estimate, and that we intentionally overestimated the impact of those calls on STR properties. And so with that, we still had those findings that 90% of the STRs in the sample did not have any calls, and the 10% that did were similar to non-STR properties, but again, that 1 more call per year of an observed difference. I know that the other analyses are of less interest to the committee at this time, so I don't need to talk about those if you don't want me to, but I just wanted to let you know where we were with this. No update has been done to this paper since 2021, so these are the findings as of May 2021. So thank you for having me, and I am happy to answer any questions that you have.
Thank you for being with us today. Members, are there questions? Mr. Reeves.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Ms. Anderchuk, I'm sorry. I've heard through multiple people that you had provided Councilman Ridley with a spreadsheet that had 1,157 911 311 calls that you had attributed to STRs. Can you discuss that, please?
If I can get my mic on. I did not provide Mr. Ridley or Councilman Ridley with a spreadsheet.
Okay, did you provide him with that number?
I did not report a number of STR complaints to Councilmember Ridley.
Are you sure about that? Because I talked to Councilman Ridley about this.
Yes, and I did too. And so what he has is an application that has a certain number of nuisance calls associated with addresses. So there's not an update to the analysis that we did.
So you're saying that you did not tell him there was 1,157? You did not tell him that number, or you did not show that number?
I did not.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Reeves. Just one follow-up on that. Am I correct? I know we've had some conversations here on in our other meetings that because there is not an STR classification, the tracking is followed by essentially the items that we do have, whether it's a parking violation or a noise violation, or those are how those are logged in the system. Is that correct?
So that is how we use them in the paper, but my understanding was one of the things that came out of the task force was the creation of an STR complaint type that I think 311 is using, but I'm not sure.
And so that would rely on everyone being aware that that was available and able to be utilized. But would it be fair to say that perhaps not everyone, who may not be as familiar with the system would know to scroll down and find an STR versus saying, well, I'm complaining about all the cars on my street? I mean, was that evaluated at all? And I know it's a little bit theoretical, but just to try to help us understand.
So we did not. So the STR complaint type did not exist at the time that we did the analysis, meaning that we had to use other things to serve as proxies for these might be the type of nuisances created by a property based on what we were hearing from the public and the task force. So I really can't speak to the new service request type.
Thank you for that clarification. And I would like to acknowledge Mr. McGregor joined us at 9:12 a.m. And I would also like to acknowledge for the record that Chair Shadid is also in line. Thank you, Mr. Del Castillo. So are there other questions? Mr. Bering.
Thank you, Chair. Ms. Anderchuk, thank you for the information and the follow-up. Regarding your goals that you stated for the paper, a couple of follow-up questions. For the 311 data, did you obtain any breakdown of calls by zoning district, basically R districts versus non-R districts?
We did not obtain or produce a breakdown by zoning district.
Okay, and similarly, I would imagine the answer, but your second goal you mentioned was, are they more often investor owned or not? And I believe in your paper, you stated that approximately 50% were corporately owned. And from our perspective, I would be curious to see what that breakdown is from a zoning district, R versus non-R, in consideration of the accessory use proposal. So how was the ownership entity obtained when you made that conclusion of the 50% number?
Yeah, thank you for the question. So that's discussed in the paper, and I can answer it for you now. So what we did is we looked at the tax appraisal data, and essentially we were looking for any sort of tag that would designate an entity that wasn't a person's name, LLC, Inc., Corp., and that, again, is not a perfect measure because, of course, people could have an LLC that they own a private home in that's not even used as an STR, but so for those properties, we looked for a record in the tax appraisal district that had one of those indicators that it was some sort of business entity.
Okay, and you don't have of course, you don't have a zoning district breakdown of where those corporate entities are.
We do not.
Okay, and then your third goal you mentioned was what was the impact on affordable housing? Do I understand that the conclusion was that it's negligible, essentially?
Yes, so it was less than 1% of the available housing stock in the city of Dallas, and we spoke with the director of housing. I'm not a housing expert, but what we heard was that something less than 1% would likely have negligible impact.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Bering. Other questions? Oh, my apologies. Yeah, Commissioner.
Good morning.
And thank you for joining us, and on the record at 9:14 a.m. Thank you.
I've got a quick question regarding how we as a city are able to maintain good faith in, for example, the number of MIH required affordable units we have, and in the program where we're requiring developers to have a specific percentage of specific income brackets in their apartments so that they get, special concessions such as additional height and density. How might that translate to how we're regulating this if we allow, a percentage of units in multifamily to be Airbnb?
I think that's more of a land use. I can talk to Stephen to ask him to address it. Do you want it addressed now, or I can craft, but I would prefer to defer it to Stephen. If you have questions for data analytics.
Yeah, I was going to say, that's not something that was tracked, is that correct?
No, that is correct. We did not
Hold
track
off on
that.
that. Thanks.
And thank you for the question, Commissioner Popkin. I think a number of folks have similar questions as well. So Mr. Reeves, and then Commissioner Stannard, I see you have a question as well. Mr. Reeves?
Okay, thank you. The source of data in 2021 was Muni Revs, correct?
Yes, that is correct for the STRs.
Because okay, and I think it was the number of STRs identified at that time were 2,229.
Correct.
And how many STRs does Muni Revs say that we have now? Not registered ones, but we know that at best, a fraction of the ones are registered. How many do we have today?
I don't know. The city controller is the keeper of that information.
You're the data analytics person and you don't have that number?
I'm here to speak on the 2021 paper. That is the last time that my team picked up this topic.
Okay. So what is your opinion of Air DNA and Inside Airbnb and host compliance that are saying that we're well north of 6,000 now?
I do not know enough about the Inside Airbnb methodology, and I haven't looked at the current number, so I don't know.
What about host compliance and Air DNA?
I don't know about what Airbnb is. Again, I'm here to talk about the 2021 paper, and I can't speak for code compliance.
And because nobody's asked you for an update, 2021, 15, 16 months ago, that's the only data that you have.
That is the only data that we have here to talk about, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Reeves. Commissioner Stannard?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair, for allowing me to ask a question. I appreciate it. My question, Ms. Endercheck, is when you talk about that there is a negligible impact on housing, I would ask theoretically, did you consider if there was an increase in use
Commissioner Stannard, you're
of
breaking up.
homes as STR, for instance, if that's housing and not both? Okay, can you hear me now?
It's very cutting in and out. Was your question on the housing question, the 2021 number
Yes.
versus the other reporting that we've received? But I think the housing question may
No.
not be for data analytics. Is it a
No.
housing question?
No, it's not. It's the question of when she said there's no impact on the housing market, did she consider theoretically if there is an increase in STRs, would there be an impact on housing stock, rental stock?
Thank you for the question, ma'am. So what we did is we produced a number. This is how many we think there are. This is what the percentage is in the field. And then we turned that question over to housing. So we did not do any considerations of what it would look like if it were to grow. And I think that that's really
Okay,
a question
thank
for
you.
housing, right? Around what is the percentage that you'd think, okay, this is a significant impact on our housing stock now, and and I am not a housing expert.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Stannard. So members, any final questions? Dr. Anderchek, thank you very much for being with us today. And
Thank
we
you for having
appreciate
me.
sharing the information. So, Mr. Doss, if you could give us an update on your briefing. I know we had some questions from our last meeting.
All right, thank you very much for that. We'll skip ahead to the relevant slides. So a lot of this is just kind of a rehashing what we discussed at our last meeting. This purpose statement is unchanged from our last meeting. In your case report, you'll notice that we have now this discussion of an accessory use. That's something that came out of our last meeting, a request to kind of flesh out that idea of an accessory use version of short-term rental. So one thing I did want to jump out in front of is the discussion of kind of accessory use versus accessory dwelling unit, because one thing that city planners like to do is have really similar names for things that are not similar. So the thing we're talking about today is accessory use. So this is a kind of subcategory of uses, and the definition is much longer, but essentially is an accessory use is any use that is customarily incidental to a main use. So there has to be a main use on a property, and then depending on the specific accessory use, you can use a portion of the property for this other thing. Normally that limit is like 5% of the area. You know, one kind of example of this could be, and you know, this, don't direct quote me on this, but let's say you had a retail store and you also wanted to have an outdoor plant nursery as an accessory to that retail store. That additional kind of accessory use of plant nursery would be customarily incidental to that retail use and couldn't operate on its own outside of being a subset of that retail use. So not the best example, but we'll get there. An accessory dwelling unit is something different. An accessory dwelling unit is defined as a rentable additional dwelling unit subordinate to the main unit located on a building site with a single family use. So ADUs is something we have a process for right now in city code, and we do have an accessory dwelling use item that has been kind of pending before ZOAC for a while now. The discussion was to kind of iron out short-term rentals and then dive into ADUs. So those are the kind of two differences, and we're talking today about accessory use, not accessory dwelling units. So to get into the accessory use, so the proposed or potential language that's in your case report would create a new accessory use called home sharing. This would allow the use of a property for the accommodation of overnight guests for fewer than 30 consecutive days, but only if there's a primary resident that actually resides on the property. You could establish that in a number of different ways, whether that's homestead exemption, motor vehicle registration, voter registration, kind of whatever different methods that the city feels is appropriate. Now, we can't require that the actual operator of that home sharing use also be that primary resident, because then we run into the same issues we would run into if we tried to require owner occupancy or operator occupancy. But we can require that the permanent resident give permission to an operator to use that property as a home share. I see that as being sort of a, for lack of a better term, a tenant protection measure of saying, hey, the tenant, if they don't own the property, if they just are renting, and the landlord wants to use the property in addition to renting it long-term to them as a home share, we could come in and say, well, the tenant has to acquiesce to that use. I don't think that is a perfect solution, but I do think that, you know, the goal of the having a primary resident actually live there would be that accountability factor of hopefully policing some of those negative externalities that come from, that could potentially come from the use of the property as a short-term rental or as, in this case, as a home share. So that's that. We also talked about parking. I just wanted to kind of go back a step and discuss some of the parking requirements for some of the other cities that we looked at. San Antonio requires a minimum of 1 space per rental unit. New Braunfels requires a minimum of 1 space per sleeping room, and you can't count the garage in that number. And then Arlington limits the parking to the number of off-street spaces that are available. They do that through the registration ordinance, so it's kind of a enforcement piece rather than a zoning piece. And I do want to remind you that most residential units in the city of Dallas already have a parking space required, or at least 1 parking space required of them. So there are very few cases that I can see where there would just be no parking at all available off-street for any of these uses. If the committee wants to explore further or propose a regulation for this, we can certainly take that forward. This slide is just a complete copy and paste from last time, but I did want to remind the committee of the kind of changes we made. So, of course, we have the 6 total or 10%, whichever is lower, maximum of short-term rental units in a multifamily property in a multifamily zoning district where it is allowed. So MF2A, MF2 SAH, MF3, MF4, those are the districts where we have currently listed as allowing short-term rentals. And in multifamily projects in those districts, that cap would exist. And then we also have the prohibition of any unit as an STR on a property that has received and utilized a mixed income housing bonus. I have discussed that a little bit further with BI, and we don't foresee any issues with kind of tracking that. It's as long as we know to look for if the MIH was used, if a development bonus was used, as long as BI knows to check that, then they can check that. They know if it's been used or not, and we can make a determination on if a property is allowed to have short-term rentals. This is a slide that I have in here twice, and I did want to go back and look at some of the other largest U.S. cities to kind of take a look at what they do. We have our normal comparison cities that we've already looked at. I did want to pull a few that aren't as similar to Dallas, which is why we did not really include them, all of these in our first round of comparisons. But I think it's kind of important to look at these now. So New York City, they do allow short-term rentals, but the host must be present for the entire duration of the stay, and there's a limit of 2 guests. And you can't restrict those 2 guests to certain portions of the property. They have to have full access. That's mainly a life safety issue for them. Los Angeles, we already have discussed them. They only allow short-term rentals as that accessory home sharing use. Chicago has a little bit more complex of a scheme where they do allow it. They do require registration. They require payment of hotel tax. They do require, if it's a single-family property, owner occupancy is required. If there is and then there is a cap of 25% or 6 units used as short-term rentals, or they call them vacation rentals, in multifamily buildings. In Phoenix, there's no regulations that I can find in zoning, but they do have to register and pay the hotel tax. And in Philadelphia, which is in the top 10 largest cities of the United States, I was unaware of that until this morning. They classify it as they call it limited lodging, and it's an accessory use, and they do require that residency operator. So you either have to be a long-term tenant or the owner of the property to operate as what they call limited lodging. Other than that, if you're not one of those categories, they call it accommodation of guests, and they treat it more like a hotel. And the rest of my slides are kind of informational items we've discussed before, just so we have some of that information if we need it. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions that the committee may have.
Thank you, Mr. Doss. I expect you are going to have some questions. Members, questions? Mr. McGregor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Doss, I'm trying to understand the 5%. It seems that just intuitively, it seems very limiting to me, but maybe the way to ask the question is, if these regulations will eventually apply to ADUs, when and if those go through, does that 5%, that 5% would be unreasonable for, say, a guest house, because most guest houses are far more than 5% of the area of the land.
So in the current draft, that 5% for an accessory use is kind of a general rule, but in our draft, we remove that requirement because it's kind of 5% is a very, very small portion to say that's where your guest has to stay, and it's not really realistic. So we removed that 5% of the structure area in our draft.
Hold on, Mike. The proposed amendments that were provided to us as part of your report under lodging uses. Wait, where is this? General provisions A, paragraph 3. It may not occupy more than 5% of the area of the lot containing the main use. So is this no longer the current draft?
So section A is general provisions for all accessory uses, and I wanted to provide that for reference. Down at the bottom of that page, on page 7, so B, specific uses, 2.1, accessory home sharing. Item E, paragraph 2, subparagraph 2, the area restrictions in paragraph A3 do not apply to this use.
I'm sorry, take me again. We're in specific uses B, then?
Yeah, just the very bottom, the very last line of page 7.
Second to last.
Okay. Yep, okay, all right. So we don't have that percentage anymore. All right, and then follow-up question, is similar terms, where did the 6-unit or 10% number come from?
That came from the committee.
And if I may, Mr. McGregor, is it correct that that was generally modeled on the boarding house restriction that already exists within residential uses in multifamily districts?
That would stand to reason that that is where the number came from.
Okay, thank you.
And I'm happy to, if I remember correctly, when we had that discussion, we were referencing existing uses allowed within the code, which include the boarding house use, which is an allowed multifamily district use, which is limited to 6 units or more. Is that correct? And Mr. Doss, I think that may have been Dr. Adrea when we had that meeting. But is that correct?
Yes, I think my wife was having a baby that day. But yes, the lodging or boarding house definition is 1 to 6 guest rooms. And like I said, and that's allowed in those MF2, 3, and 4 districts. So I think it stands to reason that that's the cutoff.
And so it mirrored that, or that thinking behind that would have been that it would mirror that existing provision or that existing use that's allowed under a code. Members, other questions? Commissioner Popkin.
So I think you started to address a question I had a few minutes ago regarding how a building inspection uses the MIH program to kind of clue them in that they need to be checking certain things. How are MIH program requirements tracked over time, and how does that begin to relate to how we'll track this in multifamily?
Sure. So kind of 2 pieces. So if we're talking about tracking this or just knowing a number for short-term rental, it's going to require a CO. So they're going to have to go to BI and apply for that, provide all the documentation they need, get a CO, also register with code compliance. So we'll be able to have that information. We'll have the active COs by address that are issued. In terms of the mixed income housing, we can't get super far into that, but the housing department tracks that performance, because when you go in to get a CO and a building permit for mixed income project, one of your checklist items is to go to housing and get a letter from them saying that you're complying with all of their rules and regs. And you take that to BI, and say, hey, I got this signed by Mr. Noguera, and I need my permit. But that's all kind of managed by housing.
And so that's managed up front when they're getting their CO, and presumably there's some type of regulation after that initial CO.
So the mixed income housing would be a building permit, since you get things like building height and things that are prior to CO. And then in a multifamily project, you don't actually get COs for those individual units. You get a CO for the whole building, but it's essentially, all the mixed income housing stuff is kind of checked before they can start building, because it's all about getting a permit. And then on the back end, tracking that, making sure the income number is the same or is correct for that year, that's all on the housing department.
Okay, so if there's an MIH program with Airbnbs in it, or let's say just short-term rentals, then those end up being somewhat like two separate processes, two separate points in the process.
Yes, so theoretically, they would have come in, they would have built their building already, they would have gotten their building permit, they would have it all essentially completed and ready for residency, and then if they wanted to do short-term rental lodging, they would come in and have to get a CO for that in order to operate legally. At that point, again, we would just ensure that when BI is going to do a review to issue a CO for short-term rental lodging, they need to, one of the items on their checklist needs to be, hey, is this a mixed income housing project? Because you're not allowed to do this in a mixed income housing project. If they receive the bonus, then they'll be able to look in the records, they'll know if that bonus was used. They'll say, oh, well, they built 10 feet higher than their base zoning allows them to, they use the mixed income housing development bonus. Subsection 3 or whatever of the short-term rental lodging section says you can't do this if you used a bonus. We'll deny the CO right then and there because there's no path forward.
So as proposed by staff, that would not be allowed. And if not using the MIH bonus, then a CO could be given for, I guess, hotel STR use in multifamily for that project.
Yes, so long as that, even if they're, every project in an MF2 district theoretically can use the mixed income housing bonus because it's a by right bonus process. But then if they don't use it, then they are eligible to come in and get a CO for the short-term rental lodging. But then we still have to do the math and say, well, how many COs have already been issued for short-term rental lodging on this property? Because there's that cap of 10% or 6. We do that math also. That's another kind of piece of the checklist you have to go down. The BI has to go down to see if they can issue the CO. So they do that check. They say, okay, they didn't use the mixed income housing development bonus. That's fine. They only have 2 and they have 200 units, so they're only at 1%, and 2 units, so they're under 6, they're under 10%. Now they can do this.
So a property owner will be required to get a CO from building inspection for each unit in the building being used for this use.
I believe so.
Hi, this is Sarah May. A CO is required for each use per owner or operator. So if they're different owner or operators, they're going to need an individual CO.
So if it's one owner operator, they get their CO for this use, they could have 6, they could have 20. At some point that's regulated, but when they get their CO, that's not the point where it's regulated. How many?
The CO will say how many units are covered under that certificate of occupancy, and it would have to comply with whatever code is adopted. 6 units, 10%, the lesser of those two. And that would be a cumulative number of units for the whole development, right?
Not per building, is what you're saying. And so once that CO is issued and those units are then occupied as STRs, then if it ends up there are more units being used as STRs than there's a CO approval for, then that becomes a code compliance issue?
Yes, that's right. If they are not complying with their approved CO, then someone can call for an illegal land use what is it, service request? Yes.
Does that then become one of the issues where we basically like give them a fine, and if they don't address the fine, then we like sue them to come into compliance?
Good morning, Jeremy Reed with Code Compliance. Yeah, so essentially we would issue the normal process for enforcement with code enforcement. If there were to be an illegal land use situation, we would issue them a notice of violation to request that they come into compliance. In this case, that would be either to obtain a CO if possible, or cease using it outside the scope of the CO that they do have. At which point, if they don't, yes, then we would take enforcement action, including citations.
Are we deliberating on how much those citations would be, or is that part of the regulatory aspect, not the zoning aspect?
The citation fines are set by municipal court, not code compliance.
But it's not within our purview.
Do you have any idea what those citations are? How much they are?
No, ma'am, I don't.
I feel like there's a lot of money on the table, and like a little slap on the wrist and a fine may not be, I don't know. I feel like there's a lot more to gain than to lose. Thank you.
Thank you,
I can
Commissioner
answer.
Popkin. Mr. Doss.
Quick question. So state law sets the maximum citation for land use violation at $2,000 per day per occurrence. But again, the actual amount of the fine is actually set by the judge. But state law authorizes up to $2,000 per day per incident per violation.
Thank you, Mr. Doss. That's very helpful.
Members, other questions? So Commissioner Standard, I actually have a couple questions first, and then we'll come back to you. So, we're still in first round. I haven't had any questions, if I may. Thank you. So back to the question on accessory uses. Mr. Doss, could you speak to, I think you had your slide in your presentation that talked about that they are incidental to the primary use. But what would be typical in a residential district for an accessory use?
I have the section of code pulled up, but it's
A game court, a garage. Well, a garage would be a structure, not a use.
so we could say like a swimming pool, I believe, is technically an accessory use to residential. You don't have to go get a CO for a swimming pool if it is a private swimming pool for for a residence. But if you're going to open up a swimming pool for your HOA, that does need a building permit and a CO and all that fun stuff, because it's not incidental to an individual residential use.
And so as we're talking about these, or a consideration of an STR, which we're defining as a lodging use, it's a use that's not currently allowed in a residential district. Would that be a disconnect between introducing a use type that's not currently allowed?
It's hard to answer that question, but I think if you go back and look at zoning codes from, say, the 30s and 40s, a lot of times you'll find accessory uses that are allowed in single-family zoning districts are things like dentist's office and doctor's office, taxidermy shops, auto repair. In today's world, it's the exact opposite. Those things would never be allowed as accessory uses to single-family. So I think it's a question of what is the policy that the committee feels is appropriate for today. And if the committee feels that it's appropriate for that use to be an accessory use to residential, then that's the kind of the decision they can make.
And I think we're about to have a follow-up from Ms. Weimer.
Yes, hi, Megan Weimer, Chief Planner, but previously with Building Inspection. Chapter 51A, and I assume 51 also, those codes do address that situation. So the building official has the authority to determine if a use is customarily incidental to a main use. And although an accessory use does not have to be allowed in the district in which it is being authorized. It just has to be allowed as a main use. So for example, like a hotel use. say there's a hotel and it's allowed in a specific district, but a commercial amusement inside is not allowed in that district, the building official can authorize a commercial amusement inside as an accessory to the hotel, like a dance banquet hall. So I think that answers the question. I hope I didn't get too far off track with that.
Well, and I think that's what I was just trying to understand is how accessory uses are considered. And obviously we're defining a new use. That's what the charge is before us, a lodging use, short-term rentals. And as it's in our case report today for an accessory use, it would be proposed as requiring a main residential use. This would then be a lodging use per its definition, and it just seemed like there was a disconnect because currently Chapter 51A, lodging uses are prohibited, office uses, personal service, there's all the prohibited uses. And so I was just trying to understand that there was a disconnect between those two as we're considering this.
Right, and yeah, the building official would not consider that a disconnect. Also, I'd just like to go back a little bit just to address, I don't know if this helps in any way, but you had asked about other uses that are considered accessory to a residential use. The code does include a couple of accessory uses that wouldn't technically be allowed as main uses in residential, and those are the home occupation. That's an accessory use. You know, I can have my personal office, my accounting office in my residential home, or a day home is another accessory. So that's like a home daycare.
Thank you for that. And so
Yes.
I guess when we think about those, in light of some of the restrictions we now have on what we're considering, is there the ability to consider these, and I don't know if this goes back to Mr. Doss or not, as a residence? We're saying that a primary resident has to be on site, but the resident can be a homeowner, it can be a tenant. I mean, that cannot be defined currently. Is that correct?
That is correct. We can't, and further, we can't limit the operator to be the resident. You have to be able to live in Oklahoma and operate a business in Texas. Essentially, that's where we've landed at with the Fifth Circuit ruling. And we can require that there be a permanent resident, a primary resident, and that they exist and that they call that place their domicile. But we can't require that they also be the operator of that home share. So it's just trying to get us closer to that accountability level. But again, we can't, there's certain lines we just can't cross.
Understood. And I guess it goes back to, how we're defining this and how we're thinking about that. So thank you for those clarifications. I know Commissioner Standard had a question, but do any of other members have a question? Oh, Commissioner Blair.
I want to go back to incidental uses to a main use. So in what's being proposed right now, we're defining accessory dwelling unit, which is incidental to the main uses. That's correct, right?
Not accessory dwelling unit, but home sharing.
Home sharing. Okay, and in that, one of the uses that would be considered allowable is whether it's the owner operator or the tenant operator, they could conceivably rent out, if they have a cabana or the swimming pool, for daytime operation. Is that not correct?
So the way we have it defined currently is that it's a full or partial dwelling unit, so the actual dwelling unit, that is rented for the purposes of overnight accommodation.
So does that mean I can't, that if this was to move forward, then I could not rent out my swimming pool, or if I have a tennis court or have a basketball court, I could not rent that out for an activity for today?
I believe that's the case today, is that you would not be allowed to rent out your swimming pool, full stop. I don't think that's allowed today. Whether or not this moves forward would not change that.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Stannard.
And I promise this will be my last question. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can. Much better connection. Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry about that. Mr. Doss, here's my question. And I've gotten lots of calls about this. When you put out this thing about home sharing, when STRs came up, I studied the Los Angeles example. And Los Angeles doesn't use the term STR. They have used the term home sharing in exchange for STR. That's their term. And my understanding is the way their program works is if you reside and show you reside for 6 months of the year in your home, you are allowed to rent it out as a home share, the whole dwelling unit, for 4 months of the year. And that's the way they tried to deal with not having investors do it, but giving some credence to single family owners able to do this. So I'm confused of what you are differentiating about home sharing and calling it an accessory use. Aren't we really saying that if you reside there, you can rent out your house? Because Los Angeles does not require that that person be present on site in order to do that. Could you clarify that for me, please? And for everybody.
Yes, so we did model this as closely as we could on Los Angeles. However, we cannot dictate that the resident be the operator. Because of the Fifth Circuit ruling that came down, it was a New Orleans case, but it applies here, that we cannot limit that operator to being a resident of the state of Texas. So while the Los Angeles ordinance says, hey, you, the primary resident, are also the operator, and you have to be the same person, we can't say that. So that's the kind of key difference, and that's really why the proposal today, the home sharing accessory use, doesn't go as far as the Los Angeles version does, because we simply can't. The other piece of this is that the accessory home sharing is that attempt, I believe, to get to a level of accountability to where even if that tenant, that long-term tenant, the owner, whoever it is, the primary resident, we're not proposing to require them to be on site, but the existence of a primary resident, the use of that property as a permanent residence for someone could act as a deterrent to some of the negative behaviors and events that occur at short-term rentals.
Yes, but as a follow-up, I have to ask this, quite frankly, then aren't we going against what was the initial direction of the KISS solution, which was to say no STRs in single-family residence areas? Doesn't this totally go against that and basically allow them?
So as an independent body, the Zoning Ordinance Advisory Committee can make recommendations independent of what City Council or City Plan Commission has asked them to do. That's why this agenda has a separate item. We are discussing them together, but that's why we have a separate item for the accessory uses. It originated with the committee, and if the committee determines that it's appropriate, they can make a recommendation of the City Plan Commission. If City Plan Commission determines that it's appropriate to go along with the original item that originated from City Council, they can move it forward as well. But of course, the final authority to approve anything, of course, always lies with City Council.
But you don't feel like, and then I will stop because I am a guest, but you don't feel like in offering this secondary home sharing, you don't feel like that completely undoes the initial what the committee's been working on for 2 months? I mean, I guess I don't understand why this was added.
So as staff, I feel like it's our responsibility to provide all potential solutions. And of course, the committee is free to take those solutions or not. City Plan Commission is free to do that, as is City Council. I do feel that if staff did not present all potential opportunities to the committee, then that would be a disservice to the committee, because I do feel it's our responsibility to provide all the information that we can.
Mr. Doss, one follow-up.
I appreciate that. Thank you, Mr. Doss. That's all. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Commissioner Standard. Mr. Doss, would you confirm this was added to our agenda at the request of ZOAC at our last meeting? Is that correct?
That is correct.
Thank you. Second round, questions from members. Mr. McGregor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mine is not a question. It's more of a clarification so that the record reflects that the draft provided to us of the new language. Hang on, let me open it up here for a second. Under the proposed amendments, the portion that relates to the 6 units or 10% probably has a typo that says greater, lesser of 6 units or 10%. I think you meant to say lesser. I just want to make sure the record reflects that that's a typo. Is that correct?
That is correct. It should say lesser.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you for the careful reading, Mr. McGregor. I've read right by that. Any other questions, members? We will go ahead and move to our registered speakers then. We are going to begin by hearing from those who we have not taken previously, and then we'll go down the list. Each speaker will be given 1 minute, and we will begin with Stephanie Kelly. Stephanie Kelly, present or online?
I see her online.
Thank you, Mr. King. Good morning, Ms. Kelly. If you'll please begin with your name and address for the record.
My name is Stephanie Kelly, and I live at 6 Stonebriar Court in East Dallas.
Thank you. We're ready for your comments.
I am the president of an HOA with an STR. When I first heard about the STR in the community, I was very against the idea. Many ideas ran through my head as I didn't understand what to expect. Over time, I noticed how the on-site homeowner maintained his property as well as put forth efforts into the neighborhood. I watched as he vetted his guests and made sure they knew what to expect from our community. Last, he is paid up on homeowner dues. I'm here to say that a good on-site homeowner can make a good addition to the neighborhoods. Thank you.
Thank you for being with us, Ms. Kelly. Next speaker, John James, followed by Sharaka Darmangatu. Sorry, the name is cut off on my screen. Hopefully I got that right. John James.
Not online.
Not online and not present. And thank you for being with us, sir. Your name is cut off on my screen. Sir, can you turn the microphone on? We can't capture you.
No.
It's right in front of you in the middle of the, yeah.
There we go.
Thank you, sir.
Yes, ma'am. My name is Charles Darman. I live at 4530 Victor Street. I am here to defend the fair use of my property as a citizen of Dallas. Most of this room is familiar with the Big D Reads program, encouraging everyone to read The Accommodation by Jim Schutz. It speaks to how racial boundaries were drawn with violence in Dallas. Xenophobes have torched, zoned, and burned everything that they felt was uncomfortable, different, colored, or in other words, not white. Last month, my property on Swiss Avenue had a black couple in it, and I got 2 calls and 3 texts from my neighbors, although I didn't get a single alert from my noise alarm. Recently, my noise alarm went off twice, and when I drove by, I saw a group of white students having a small get-together in the same house. Not a single call from the same concerned neighbors that accuse me of doing such things as running a brothel or a drug house. Let me be honest, since they can't. It isn't that STRs are in your neighborhood, it's that non-whites are in your neighborhood. Remove the homes not hostile sign and replace them with keep my neighborhood white. I've been waiting to say that for a while.
Thank you for joining us, sir. Jamal Nicholson, followed by Gary Pearson, and then Paul Sanders. Jamal Nicholson?
Not online.
Jamal Nicholson, not present. Gary Pearson?
Not online.
Gary Pearson, not online, not present. Paul Sanders?
Not online.
Paul Sanders, not online, not present. Peter Viog, followed by Wahib Harari, followed by Diane Mott. Peter Viog?
The first 2 are not online. Miss Mott is online.
Okay. Peter Viog, not present. Wahib Harari? Not online, not present. Diane Mott?
Here.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. My name is Diane Mott. I live at 13109 Halloween Circle in District 10. I'm our crime watch and VIP chair for this neighborhood. We've had issues with the STR across the street since it started up in April of 2022. The home has an absentee landlord, despite the fact no one lives in the house, and it is only for parties and weekends. DCAD lists the property as a homestead for the California owners. Is that even legal? Visitors at this location have numbered from 6 to 50, with cars lining our streets, which is very bad. We've had enclosed car trailers parked on the main street that have had orange cones around it. We also had a food truck a couple of weeks ago with same entry surrounded by cones and running a loud generator at night. This thing was open for business. Will further home buyers, will they have to ask about not just schools, but crime stats, shopping access, but how many STRs are in that neighborhood before I buy? Please support the KISS solution and prevent hotels from operating in our neighborhoods and that are zoned or residential. Move the KISS solution forward, please, to CPC. And I reject the idea of home sharing proposal. Thank you.
Thank you for being with us, Ms. Mott. Next speaker, Sherry Gambow, followed by Carol Considine. Good morning, Ms. Gambow.
Oh, there we go. My name is Sherry Gambow. I reside at 4406 North Crest Road. Like you, I'm a public servant. I serve as the vice chair for the Board of Adjustments, and I hear many cases every single month on missed permits, incorrect zoning, and we simply do not have the resources in this city to regulate or manage any of the proposals that we talked about today. We need to support the KISS program. We have an STR in our neighborhood today. The 12-year-old that lives next door to the STR will no longer stay at home alone. They are smoking pot in the backyard at 10 a.m. They are having weddings. There's 10 to 12 cars on our street every single day. The city simply does not have the capacity to enforce any regulations on these things. We need to zone it and use the KISS solution for this program.
Thank you for being with us today. Gary Lawson. Good morning, Mr. Lawson.
Good morning. My name is Gary Lawson. I live in the 14,000 block of Highmark Square. Texas law recognizes the right that property owners have to be protected from unreasonable nuisance in the very foundation of why we have zoning. Texas Supreme Court in 1900 made clear that one landowner's lawful use or enjoyment of their property becomes unreasonable and it substantially interferes with another landowner, it should be prohibited. I'd ask you to please add short-term rentals to the definition of lodging and do not add home sharing to accessory. It conflicts, as another speaker mentioned, with the basic premise, and it would violate the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals decision in New Orleans. We're not talking about petty annoyances, cigar smoke wafting from my neighbors. We're talking about raves. We're not talking about ma and pa owners. We're talking about investors turning their homes and condos into transient daily living hotels, short-term rentals for parties, for raves. I represented the Dallas Police and Fire Pension Plan for 35 years. I know police officers who said going to raves was one of the most dangerous things they have ever experienced.
That's your time. Thank you for being with us today. And my apologies. Carol Considine, I moved on. Is Ms. Considine present? Is she online? Not present, not online.
Online.
Next speaker, Paige Morales, followed by Will Wakefield.
Paige Morales is online.
Can you please say that again, Mr. King?
Ms. Morales is online.
Thank you. Ms. Morales? Let's see. Is Ms. Morales available?
It looks like she dropped off, possibly having some technical difficulties.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. King. We'll come back.
Wakefield is online.
Next speaker, Melanie Van Landingham. Should we just go ahead and take him since I called his name? Good morning.
Good morning. Melanie Van Landingham, 6311 Lakeshore, Dallas. Rentals of less than 30 days are incompatible with neighborhoods, and it's getting worse. STRs, by their very nature, are fly-by-night hotel businesses where crime is escalating. All-night parties, lewd behavior, violence, felony assaults, sex trafficking, prostitution rings, and drug houses. They threaten residents, weaken neighborhoods, and police hate them. Corporate platforms and owners are incapable of handling them. SDRs are out of control. They are clear and present dangers to city budgets, first responders, affordable housing, quality of life, and public safety. If mom and pops need cash, they can still rent for more than 30 days. The Fifth Circuit Court has spoken. A zoning solution is the only workable answer. We support your very wise keep it simple solution. Vote yes on item 1 to move this to CPC, and vote no on item 2, allowing home sharing, which is just STRs by a different name. Thank you.
Thank you for being with us today. Next speaker, Erica Kim, followed by Ray King. Erica McKim.
I'm here, but I'm driving. Can you give me a time to pull over?
Yes, we'll come back to you. We will need to have your camera on, please.
Okay.
Ray King.
Mr. King is online.
Good morning, Mr. King.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Okay, yes, I'm Ray King at 4811 Calvin Avenue, owner and STR operator. I can agree with the people who have bad STRs next door to them. We need a regulation to make all STR owners comply and register. STRs are extremely secure. We have noise monitors. We screen clients that stay at the property. Not anyone could just stay there. I reject probably 50% or more of the people who tried to stay. Airbnb absolutely prohibits parties. No STR owner wants a party ever. No STR owner wants anyone to be disturbed in the community, and we tell the guests that. So putting in compliance, the good STR operators will follow. The bads will not. Changing zoning, the bads will not follow. They will continue to operate. Putting in compliance, getting money into the coffers to allow us to monitor the bad owners, operators will greatly help us. STR owners will help you also monitor that and report non-compliance operators. But
Mr. King, that's your
STRs are
time.
not your source of crime, and STRs are not going to solve your
Thank you
problems.
for being
They're
with
trying
us
to have
today.
one
That's your
demographic
time.
in your community.
Thank you, Mr. King. Ms. McKim?
Yes, I'm here. Can you see me?
We can.
Okay. I am Erica McKim. I own a STR, a single family home at 8416 Cadenza Lane. When I bought the home, I was medically retired from the military, could not hold a full-time job. By being able to, I put a business plan to house people in my house, one room at a time. And I have great relationships with the people. I have good relationships with the people in my neighborhood. I'm able to take that money, improve the house. I've been able to redo roofing and gardening and make it nice. I have people during the emergencies. I have nurses staying with me many times. Because I have a home that I live in, I keep it safe. I want it to look nice. I want to be a good steward of my neighborhood. And it brings in people that would love a kitchen to cook with and have a homely atmosphere to be there. It's allowed me to not have to live with my parents or when I was going through my medical retirement. And it's allowed me to be able to hit all my medical appointments because I can work it around my
Ms.
schedule.
McKim,
So it's
that's your
been,
time. Thank you
yes.
for being with us today.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, Palak Bataka, followed by Victoria King.
Not online.
Palak Bataka? Not present, not online. Victoria King? Good morning. And our next speaker will be Sanjay Pramuthi, followed by Chrisette Dharma.
Hello. Okay. Good. Howdy. I'm Victoria King, and we live in the 600 block of Colorado Boulevard. We are for fair regulations. We have 3 little bitties, and we rent our back house, and that allows me to stay home. It allows us to afford the ever-increasing property taxes. We're not a hotel. We do this to love on people, and we've been a blessing to our neighborhood. We've never had a complaint in the 4 years. During the ice storm, we've housed people whose houses flooded. During remodels, people who are moving here or considering moving here, and we want them to love our neighborhood. Neighbors who are in town or they're here because their daughter's having a baby, and so they're staying with us so they can be close. And we've striven to be a blessing, and I feel like we've accomplished that, and it's allowed us to live in Dallas, and it would really be a detriment to take that away. So thank you for your time.
Thank you for being with us today. Sanjay Pramuthi, followed by Chrisette Dharma. Sanjay Pramuthi? Not present?
Not online.
Not online. Chrisette Dharma? Not present?
Not online.
Tessa Darmangathu, followed by Matthew Kremser.
Not online.
Tessa's not present, not online. Matthew Kremser, followed by Sufain Bajwa. Matthew Kremser?
Not online.
Not online, not present. Sufain Bajwa, followed by Terry Prescott. Mr. Bajwa? Good morning.
Good
We're
morning.
ready for your
I'm not
comments.
sure if my video is working.
It is. We can see you and hear you.
Okay. I just wanted to say, just with like internet and streaming, we should start learning and adapt to the change instead of fighting it and becoming the way of Blockbuster. we as the city of Dallas could be the front runner in that lead. Let's, start taking the technological advances to support the short-term rental market instead of ostracizing it. All these questions about partying and raves and all those things are already illegal. So let's focus on enforcing the rules and regulations we already have. We can't punish the whole population for the negative actions of one bad actor incident. That's all I have to say.
Thank you for joining us this morning. Terry Prescott, followed by Kaylee House.
Not online.
Terry Prescott, not present, not online. Kaylee House. Kaylee House, not present. Is Ms. House
Not
online?
online.
Thank you, Mr. King. Andrew Wilkins, followed by Daniel Rigner.
Andrew Wilkins is online.
Hello?
Yes. Good morning.
Hi. Yeah, I'm not really going to say anything. That I'm a
Can you
short-term
please start with
operator
your name and
at,
address, sir?
4502 Rieger. And I won't go into detail on how I'm a good operator of a short-term rental, but I will give you just some basic details of the people that I accommodate. Got a homeowner that lives in Hollywood Heights. Got someone that works for the Dallas Cowboys. Got someone that works for the State Fair of Texas, or they have a booth at the State Fair of Texas. Let's see. Yeah, people that are here buying homes, nurses, someone that's opening a new restaurant. Trying to think of what else, but not once have I ever had a party happen at one of my short-term rentals. So with that, I would encourage, I would encourage everyone on the zoning committee not just to look, and yes, I will say bad actors, but that is a very minuscule part of what is happening here. So
That's your time, sir.
Okay.
Thank you for being with us today. Daniel Rigner, followed by Bruce Richardson and Philip Terry. Daniel Rigner. Daniel Rigner, not present.
Not online.
Not present, not online. Bruce Richardson.
Not online.
Bruce Richardson, 5607 Richmond Avenue. If you were on this fence to see if staff could somehow thread the needle in a way that protects true one-off home shares, you got your answer. They can't do it. You can't circumvent that court ruling. Meanwhile, Marriott has bought big into our market since we were last here. Meanwhile, the percentage of those owners who are not corporate actually went down in the 2 weeks. By the way, my catalytic converter got stolen in the parking lot as I was walking to testify. So there are consequences to dragging this out. You have to get off the fence. Clean, clear, black and white zoning. That is the constitutional right of cities to put things where they belong and to prevent them from being where they don't belong. Please approve the council's KISS proposal encapsulated in your first agenda item.
That's your time.
Thank you.
Thank you for being with us. Philip Terry. Philip Terry, not present, not online.
Not online.
Thank you. We will go back to the top of the list. Tom Forsyth, followed by Timothy Sigler, then Ellen Beedling. Tom Forsyth.
He is online.
Mr. Forsyth. Is Timothy Sigler. Good morning, Mr. Forsyth.
My name is Tom Forsyth. I live at 2115 Siesta Drive in Dallas. STRs tear at the fabric of the quality of life in our neighborhoods. and they detract from the sense of community that we strive to build. No one should have to live next to an STR. That is why you have heard from many neighborhood association presidents like me in support of the KISS solution. And the boards of multiple associations, including my own, have enacted resolutions to zone SDRs out of neighborhoods. 4 neighborhoods have submitted petitions with hundreds of signatures to their council members asking that SDRs be zoned out of neighborhoods. Many HOAs have also enacted bans on SDRs, and you've not seen one neighborhood association that has actually rendered support for STRs. Not one, and you never will. That's because neighborhood associations are organized to protect their residents and enhance their quality of life. And the leaders of these groups know that SDRs pose a threat to the place that they call home.
That's your time, Mr. Forsyth. Thank you for being with us today. Timothy Sigler, followed by Ellen Beedling.
Yes, I'm here.
Good morning.
Good morning. My name is Tim Sigler. My address is 6553 Lake Circle Drive in Dallas, Texas, District 9. I recently was looking at ways you could rent STRs, and there's lots of sites, and then I stumbled across the Marriott site. If you think that you're out here trying to protect the mom and pop who own 1 or 2, Marriott is already in the business. When I searched for a hotel in New York, it said, hey, how about these individual places that you can rent? So then I changed over to Dallas. There are over 25 to 30 just in the date range I was looking at, staying in New York, but staying in Texas and Dallas. So if you think you're representing 1 or 2 mom or pops, someone in the backyard, Marriott is buying up these houses and apartments all over the city under our nose, and we are doing nothing to stop it. If you think people are having a hard time finding a house, it's going to get worse and worse and worse because more major corporations are going to see this as a way to make more money. Thank you.
Thank you for being with us. Ellen Beedling, followed by John Morrow, and then Olive Talley. Ellen Beedling. Good morning.
Good morning. Is this on? Okay, good. Ellen Beedling, 7538 Marquette Street. Tonight is National Night Out, one of the most important police community programs in our history. The event brings residents, law enforcement, government, and businesses together to strengthen police community partnerships and build safer, more caring communities. Per former Senator Kay Bailey Hutchison, the best way to build a safer community is to know your neighbors and your surroundings. National Night Out triumphs over a culture that isolates us from each other and allows us to rediscover our own communities. There is abundant proof that STRs are ripe for crime, and crime is just one aspect of how STRs disrupt and destabilize our neighborhoods. STRs are not neighbors. They erode our sense of community, security, and trust. I urge you to finally approve the KISS solution and move this item forward to the CPC. Thank you.
Thank you for being with us. John Morrow, followed by Olive Talley and Ed Zara. John Morrow, good morning.
Good morning. My name is John Morrow. I live at 8522 Stable Glen Drive in Dallas. And at a city council town hall budget meeting, I proposed a question to the code compliance regarding STRs. And that sparked a very lively discussion, including an officer from the Dallas Police Department. The officer told the group about responding to STR calls, what a mess they are, and how they are called at the same location over and over again. After the meeting, the officer came up to me and expressed how much the Dallas Police Department hates short-term rentals. He said they consume an inordinate amount of time and resources, as well as present opportunities for crime, including drugs and sex trafficking. Pardon me. The recent news coverage about prostitution ring being busted in Plano was a crime that originated in Dallas, hence the participation of the Dallas Police Department. It's been reported once, it's surely happening many times. It's time, and for this and for many other reasons, it's time for this committee to support the KISS solution regarding STRs and pass your recommendation on to the CPC.
That's your time.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for being
Please
with
pass
us.
on number 2.
Olive Talley, Ed Zara, then Cindy Hellstern. Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you. Olive Talley, 6133 Prospect Avenue. As Bill just said, 2 weeks ago, Dallas PD busted a sex trafficking ring at an STR in Plano, but that ring started in Dallas at least 2 other STRs. In Far East Dallas, home cameras caught STR visitors carrying AR-15s, looking for a neighbor who complained about noise. I don't have enough time to go into all of this facts, but they're there. The problem gets worse by the day and will not end until these commercial lodging businesses that are taxed as hotels are zoned out of residential neighborhoods. Nobody can control them, not the platforms, not the hosts, not the police, not code. This is an incompatible land use problem that requires a zoning solution. Please, I beg you, to move the KISS plan to CPC today and reject the unworkable, unenforceable, and possibly and probably unconstitutional home sharing proposal. Thank you.
Thank you for being with us. Ed Zara, followed by Cindy Hellstern, then Rob Thomas. Good morning.
Morning. Ed Zara, 1003 Valencia. Vote yes on DCA 21200 KISS solution and no on DCA 21202 home sharing. Hot tax code defines STRs as commercial hotels, and current zoning code prohibits hotels in residentially zoned neighborhoods. This is an incompatible land use, clear and simple. The city's failure to clarify zoning for STRs has allowed these for-profit businesses to destabilize single-family neighborhoods. The lax vetting of these mini hotel guests can also lead to rampant criminal use. A prime example surfaced last week when police raided a brothel in the middle of a Plano neighborhood where sex trafficking was taking place. Enough is enough. STR impact the affordable housing crisis by reducing the number of homes available to long-term renters and buyers. Define STRs as a lodging use in our zoning code to align it with the current hot tax code. It's time to act. Vote yes, KISS, no, home sharing, and move this forward to the City Plan Commission. Thank you.
Thank you for being with us today. Cindy Hellstern, followed by Rob Thomas, then Matt Curtis. Ms. Hellstern?
Yes, good morning.
Good morning.
I'm Cindy Hellstern, 10827 Crooked Creek Drive.
Ma'am, we cannot see you. We can hear you, but your camera's not on.
Let's see. Okay, can you see it?
Not yet. We can still hear you.
Okay, so I allowed it before, so.
So I see Mr. Thomas, Ms. Hellstern, we'll come right back to you. Okay. Mr. Thomas?
Hi, my name is Rob Thomas. I live at 1439 Sereno Drive. Olive, you said it best. But I want to address everyone in the room. If you had to live next door to a VRBO party house like I did at the one at 8338 Banquo Drive, I promise you, you would be pushing for this KISS solution to be moved forward, and you would be laughing at the wordsmithing idea of shared homes or whatever they're calling this. Look, there's good actors and there's bad actors. And I'm sure that none of you intended on bombing a plane or causing any harm to anyone else. Yet every single one of us has to take just about all our clothes off to get in the plane now for the actions of few. And sometimes that's just how it is. And so I got to ask all of you on the ZOAC committee here, do you really want to live next to a sex ring? Do you really want to live next door to one of these VRBO party houses like the one at 8338 Banquo Drive? If not, please push forward this KISS solution and reject
That's your time, Mr. Thomas. Thank you.
Idea.
Thank you for being with us. Ms. Hellstern, were you able to get your camera going? We can't see you here yet.
Okay, I'm still working on it.
Okay, well, we will come back.
Okay, thank you.
Matt Curtis, followed by Rob Stokes. Matt Curtis, not present.
Not online.
Okay, Rob Stokes, followed by Jessica Black. Rob Stokes, not present.
No, he's online. I'll give him a second.
Good morning, Mr.
My
Stokes.
name is Rob Stokes, and I live at 4 Stonebriar Court in the Lower Greenville area of Dallas. Many SDR opponents like to point to these brothel issues as trying to prove an SDR's crime. However, what they kindly forget to tell you is that it was listed on Airbnb, but not reserved by Airbnb. Had it been, the guests would have been screened and immediately removed per Airbnb policy. I'm not sure if each of you are aware, but those same SDR opponents also got on public email and proceeded to berate you, our ZOAC members, in a public forum. They called y'all incompetent. They said your discussions were nonsense, and they proceeded to call for the firing of employees. What they do have is no idea what it takes to do your job, manage the supporting roles of the city, or deal with people like themselves who only accept 100% of their way. SDR hosts are acceptable of all people, all neighbors, all walks of life, even though it's per the home sharing services. Dallas needs to grow with the times. This situation cannot be kissed goodbye. The SDR groups are already sitting at the table willing to discuss a fair and balanced city, but the other side is too busy naysaying to even sit down and look us in the eye. I trust you, the ZOAC members, will
That's
find
your
reports
time.
for all in our city. Thank you.
Thank you for being with us, sir. Jessica Black, followed by Laura Palmer. Good morning, Ms. Black.
Hello, I'm Jessica Black from Arlington, Texas, and I'm speaking on behalf of the Texas Neighborhood Coalition. In an effort to thread the needle and create an accessory use for STRs that might stand a chance of passing constitutional muster in light of the recent Fifth Circuit decision, the result is something that is completely unenforceable and ripe for abuse and fraud. In cases of fraud, neighbors and city staff will be tasked with proving the individual who on paper claims to reside at the property does not in fact live there. Local residents desperate for long-term housing will be conscripted into modern-day indentured servitude, running STRs for companies like Loftium in exchange for a place to live. Every newly built ADU will be at risk of becoming lodging instead of the long-term housing that Dallas so desperately needs. Please abandon this folly and vote today to forward the KISS proposal to CPC.
Thank you, Ms. Black. Laura Palmer, followed by Will Wakefield. Ms. Palmer? Not present?
Not online.
Okay. Mr. Wakefield, thank you for your patience.
Yeah, good morning. I live at, my home is at 531 Creed Street in Dallas. I'm a 25-year-old recent college graduate, and I saved it the last 3 years to buy my first house. And this is my dream, to be able to put my house up as a short-term rental, and it's now generating half of my monthly income. Like I said, spent my last 3 years of my life working towards this. These proposed bans will put serious financial distress on myself and many other hosts. We are Dallas citizens, and we rely on this income for a living. Why can't we strive for fair and balanced regulations that address some minor issues a few properties have? Parking, noise, and trash. It's not impossible, and we deserve compromise. How is it fair to say 95% of good hosts should lose everything over the overwhelming minority? People love to talk about all this supposed crime. Well, everybody's bringing up the same brothel case. Like, it's not the majority of homes whatsoever. And so whenever somebody finds one little piece of crime that happens in one house, they project it on everybody like this is the norm. It's not the norm. You're going to hurt a lot of Dallas residents when you do this. So thank you.
Thank you for being with us. Rosaline Costa, followed by Norma Menace, followed by Blake Arant. Rosaline Costa, good morning.
Is he on? Hi, my name is Rosalind Costa, and I live on 814 Cordova, Dallas, Texas, 75223. I have a short-term rental that is a bedroom above the garage. It's 2 people max, and I only allow 1 car to be parked on the designated parking lot that I have next to my house. It's my parking lot. I have cameras outside my house, and I live in the main house, so I see everybody that's coming in and coming out, which is 2 people max, 1 or 2 people. I have lots of guests that are coming from events, from Fair Park, concerts, nurses, families visiting relatives near the house by. I pay my taxes every single month for the city, and the city should find an option to suit hosts that are doing short-term rather than punish them completely. My rental, it's not a party, and I will never allow that. I have a little girl, and I'm a single parent, and I have a little girl of 3 years old, so that helps me pay for her school. Thank you.
Thank you for being with us today. Norma Menace. Good morning.
Norma Menace, 6219 Prospect Avenue, Dallas, Texas. Please support this KISS solution and not the home sharing. I served on all the task force. I was the only neighborhood representative. All the information was driven by either the host or the owner occupied or the lobbyist from Austin. That's where all the data came from. So you just really need to stop using that 2021 data because it is totally bad data. And by allowing STRs in residentially zoned neighborhoods, you are creating winners and losers. The losers live next door to the hotels and their lives and property are devalued. In January 2017, there were 700 STRs in the city. Today, there are 8,000. Please move this issue to CPC. Thank you.
Thank you for being with us, Ms. Menace. Ashley Martin. Yeah. Sandy Hellstrom. Yeah. Ms. Hellstrom, we see you. We'll come right back to you. Blake Orant. Blake Orant not present. Is Mr. Orant online?
Not online.
Not online. Ms. Hellstrom.
Good morning. Cindy Hellstern, 10827 Crooked Creek Drive. In respect for all of the ZOAC committee and your time, and hopefully that you'll be able to have time to move forward with the vote today, I ask that you move the KISS solution forward and that you vote yes, and that you vote no for any accessory dwelling or any home sharing usage, as it's been already shown not viable in District 5. Thank you so much, and I appreciate you.
Thank you for being with us today. Ashley Martin. Followed by Marisol Tim, then John Goodman. Ashley Martin.
Not online.
Not present, not online. Marisol Tim.
Hi, I'm Marisol Tim. I'm at 814 Elsbeth Street in Kidd Springs. I'm a superhost in Dallas. I own a triplex that was built in 1912 as a furnished boarding house run by Mrs. Velma Orr. It's been a short-term rental property for over 100 years. Short-term rentals have always been part of our vibrant city, but I've spoken a few times on behalf of short-term rental owners. So I'll just say that I understand the frustration many are feeling. We want our neighborhoods to be safe. Bad hosting allows party houses to thrive. It brings people into our neighborhoods that do not have our best interests at heart. Bad hosting needs to be addressed. By essentially banning STRs as proposed by the supporters of the Keep It Simple solution, you're inviting more bad hosts. As it is, getting 311 issues addressed in a timely manner is nearly impossible. And that's with millions in tax dollars currently being collected from hundreds of responsible hosts. Take away those taxes and you get a ban that encourages bad hosts to thrive because it's not enforceable. You can't shut them all down.
That's your time. Thank you for being with us, Ms. Tim.
We want to help.
Thank you, Ms. Tim.
Thank you.
John Goodman, followed by Greg Estelle. Good morning.
Good morning. John Goodman, 9153 Loma Vista, Dallas. Please advance the KISS solution and reject the unworkable, unenforceable, and transparent home sharing proposal. If you want a glimpse into the future, the 5 years I spent with the Marriott Corporation began when they had 5 hotels in total. I knew Marriott Senior and Marriott Junior personally. I can show you today, as no other person in this entire room can show you, exactly what the future is going to be if you give them the chance to buy residential property, and they will. They'll buy streets, they'll buy blocks, entire blocks, because it's cheaper than buying commercial real estate. And they will get their dream of having hotels in residential neighborhoods because they'll tear down everything on that block. They don't want old houses that need maintenance, that need remodeling. They're going to build their version, new version of what a short-term rental looks like. And it'll be as tall as the city will allow, and it'll be as packed together as the city will allow, and it will be as crazy as the city will allow.
That's your time. Thank you for being with us today. Greg Estelle, followed by Martin Sigler. Good morning.
Good morning. Greg Estelle, 411 Bondstone Drive. The City Council asked ZOAC to review the KISS proposal in mid-June. Since then, another 1,000 STRs have been added to the City of Dallas. The growth rate of STRs is accelerating, reinforced by this continued inaction. At this rate, the number of STRs in Dallas will double in 18 months unless you take action today. This industry does its best to create these delays. No STR regulations and no credible STR data is very good for their business. It's lousy for neighborhoods. They want you to continue to stall the implementation of a zoning solution, enforceable regulations and platform accountability. They mischaracterize who they really are and what they really do to neighborhoods. Time's up. Please support the council consensus, keep a simple solution. Vote today to move this to CPC without home sharing. Thank you.
Thank you for being with us. Martin Sigler. Sorry, I've lost my.
Yes, Martin Sigler, 6553 Lake Circle Drive, Dallas, Texas. The fundamental issue here is not about short-term rentals. It is about zoning. And one of the most fundamental purposes of zoning is to keep businesses out of neighborhoods. Short-term rentals are businesses. Businesses don't belong in neighborhoods. All of the positive comments spoken here by responsible STR operators do not mitigate the fact that short-term rentals are business operations. They have customers and employees. That's all well and good, but I don't want a business in my neighborhood. I moved into a residential zone neighborhood to live amongst neighbors, not amongst someone else's customers. After decades of precedent that businesses are not allowed in residential neighborhoods, now this committee considers the possibility of letting residents, but more often non-residents, operate a business in my neighborhood. It doesn't matter what the good intentions of some STR operators is. It doesn't change the drastic alteration of the fabric of my neighborhood. There is only one acceptable solution: adopt the KISS solution, affirm that residential zoning remains as it has always been. Businesses, including short-term rentals, cannot operate in single-family neighborhoods.
That's your
Please
time.
give us back
Thank
the
you, Mr.
tranquility
Sigler.
we believed we
Thank
would
you for being
always.
with us.
Thank
Patrick Block. And then we do have 4 speakers present who we have seen. Patrick Block not present. Is Mr. Block online?
He is online.
Good morning. We can see you, we can't hear you.
You may need to unmute your phone, sir.
Good morning, Mr. Block.
Hi, my name is Patrick Block. I live at 5806 Victor Street in District 14. I rent a room out of my house on Airbnb and have not had issues with any of my guests or with my neighbors. This is a complex problem, and simple solutions are neither fair nor balanced. And contrary to Tom Forsyth's claim, I've heard multiple HOA representatives in these meetings express support for STRs. Please ignore inaccurate information provided by the Keep It Not Smart crowd. Don't let the anger that neighbors have against remote operators hurt local residents who do not have a negative impact on the neighborhoods. Keep it smart, keep it fair and balanced. Thank you.
Thank you for being with us. So we do have 4 speakers in attendance. We'll start with Victoria Morris, followed by Paula Strife, John LaCosta, and then Dolores Sorka. Is Victoria Morris still with us? Oh, you did sign up. Thank you. We were double checking our names. So Ms. Morris, we've heard from you. Thank you. Paula Strife. Good morning. And next will be John LaCosta and then Dolores Sorka.
I'm Paula Strife, 6302 Sudbury Drive in Dallas. I'm a short-term rental owner, and for the last 3 years, I've employed an individual to manage
a short-term rental condo I own, and another to clean and do laundry. We have all 5-star reviews. Last week, I returned from the trip of a lifetime, visiting 4 countries in 22 days, staying in short-term rentals for 18 very memorable nights in Ireland, Greece, Egypt, and Italy. Our host welcomed us with the type of hospitality that I believe most Dallas STR owners extend to their guests. Recently, a friend of mine who's a retired school teacher said, "If 1 or 2 students were disrupting my class, I didn't punish the entire class." Our challenge as a city is to find a viable plan to support STR throughout the city. This is a global industry that's here to stay. Penalize the 1 or 2% that are disruptive, but please
That's your time,
support
Ms.
our
Stoll.
small
Thank you.
business owners who are welcoming visitors to our city.
Thank you for being with us. John LaCosta.
I had some of this. My name is John LaCosta, 6268 Sudbury Drive. I had some of the similar ideas that was the previous speaker, so I'll just jump to a few others. Some people here have said there's as many as 8,000. That tells you something about the demand people in Dallas have to accommodate visitors. So we should find ways to accommodate, just like the previous speaker said, every other country in the world has. By saying KISS is just being simple. It's not being attentive to a business problem. So I'd like to see the economic impact study that suggests KISS is viable, the statistical report that says there's more than 2 out of 8 students that are bad. But really get down to the numbers, because anecdotally, stolen things or houses that are being used for wrong purpose, they've happened before SDRs, and they will happen again.
That's your time, sir.
Enforcement is the issue.
Thank you for being
regardless.
with us. Doris Rocca. Dolores, my apologies.
It'll take me a minute. I injured my foot last night. My name is Dolores Levy-Soroka. I live at 4822 Swiss Avenue in Peak Suburban Edition Historic District. I really enjoy watching old westerns. In those Wild West days, a landowner could do anything they wanted with their property. Cattle ranchers insisted on open ranges versus homesteaders and their fences made for many a confrontation. Thankfully, times have changed. Dallas has specific zoning to maintain usage stability. Residential zoning is designated for homes where someone lives and where they have a long-term attachment. A hotel provides paid lodging on a short-term basis, in other words, short-term rental. There is specific zoning where hotels are permitted to operate. Zoning laws are designed to keep hotels out of residential neighborhoods. STRs are hotels. So please adopt the KISS solution, vote no to home share, and vote to move it forward to CPC, City Plan Commission. Thank you very much.
Thank you for being with us. Are there any other speakers here wanting to speak on this item? Sir?
Good morning. My name is Azhar Tawfiq. I live at 13750 Rolling Hills Lane, Dallas, Texas. So I've been coming to all these meetings like other members, and I'm very curious. I have been a STR host for the last 5 years, and it's in a residential neighborhood. And most of my guests, I have never had any complaints, so I wouldn't go into the details. But every time the data changes, last week, one of the council member mentioned 1 in 25,000 home is on STR. So my concern is we should not miss forest for the trees. if the number of houses on STRs are really small and the incidents which are mentioned, I haven't looked at the details, I would be interested to see, is it really causing a lot more impact? In fact, the enforcement should be to collect all the taxes and then have a better enforcement plan. I'm all for regulations, but then people who have been doing it for a number of years successfully, being responsible citizens, they will be wiped off as well, not their livelihood and the difference they have made in the community as well as with their employees and contractors. So thank you.
Thank you for being with us today. Yes, ma'am. This will be our last speaker.
Hi, I'm Tessa Hamilton, and I live at 4441 North Crest. We have a VRB or an Airbnb next door to us. It is apparently not registered. I have 4 children, and we've had to move our trampoline from one section of our backyard to the other one because of events going on in the other house's backyard. Pot smoking at 9 o'clock and 10 o'clock in the morning. That was my neighbor that was speaking. We have 10 to 15 cars parked out front, and limo party buses will come, and I guess everyone congregates at this house, then they all load in this bus, and we've got 10 to 15 cars on our street at any given time. We've had a wedding there. We've had grown men out in the middle of our street smoking cigarettes and just hanging out and watching all of the houses as our kids are trying to play outside. Our owner is not registered. They do have a noise meter in their house that he's made us aware of, but all that does is stop the neighbors from making so much noise that we can't complain. There's constant movement in and out. This weekend, there was nothing on the calendar, but we had anywhere between 8 to 10 trucks, pickup trucks, back and forth, different people coming and going. Anyway, it's not safe.
That's your time. Thank you for being with us. I believe Mr. Doss will ask you to sign in, please. So that concludes our speakers. All right. What? Yes, ma'am.
Hi, my name is Paige Morales. I live at 5907 Prospect in Dallas, Texas, where I also host an STR. I do want to say I also would be annoyed if I had a neighbor with a rotating door of parties as a result of an STR. Because of that, we take extensive measures to vet every single guest that's incoming. We have a very strict max number of guests allowed per home. If the guest isn't listed, they're not allowed at the home. We do not allow any sort of obnoxious activity. We have a very strict quiet hours from 10 to 10. We also have a noise detection device as well as several other monitoring devices to ensure that none of our neighbors are disrupted or put at an inconvenience as a result of our STR. I know it's easy to mention all of the negative aspects and what you see on the news, but I think it goes without being said that there's also several positive factors. Corporate housing, families who have damage to their home as a result of, storms and other issues. Thank you.
Thank you for being with us. So, ma'am, if you can please sign in with Mr. Doss. Thank you. So that concludes our speakers for today. We are going to take I'm going to say 6 minutes. We're going to come back on the record at 11 a.m. So we will stand in recess for 6 minutes. 1 a.m. We're going to go back on the record. Members. So I want to open the floor back up to members for questions for staff. I think we're any of our members online. Mr. Bering.
Is there any 311 staff in the room there?
We have code compliance and we have Mr. Doss.
Yes.
If you could maybe try with your question, we'll see if we can get the right answer, the right folk.
Sure. So first, a bit of experience. For 2 years, from 2015 to 17, I served the city of Dallas through the AmeriCorps Vista program. And I worked with a lot of community, with a lot of residents who were active in their 311 filings. And so this was primarily lower income neighborhoods. And several of those residents were very adept at filing 311 requests and getting problem properties on the community prosecutor's radar. So I have seen that there are ways, not zoning, but there are tools to address problem properties. I've in fact represented the sale of 2 commercial properties that were formerly on the community prosecutor's list and worked to find better owners for those properties. So there are steps, there are tools, and I'm curious if the code compliance staff could perhaps line out in better detail what those tools are, because I've seen what proactive residents can do positively for problem properties. I've seen that firsthand, and it's encouraging, and the tools are there. And I'd just like to hear that fleshed out a little bit more if we could hear from code compliance, please.
Mr. Reed, are you able to respond to that?
Good morning, thank you. I may need the question to be condensed. I think I missed kind of the thrust of it.
Sure. What are the, in code compliance's purview of things, what is the escalation? What are the steps that the tools a resident has in working with the city to address, say, a party house that has, repeat 311 violations? Where does it go from there?
Yes, sir, thank you. So currently, because there are no regulations specific to short-term rentals, those, as has been discussed before, those nuisance violations that sometimes come up at a, as you said, party house, potential short-term rental property, are going to be the high weeds, litter, things that are left at the property, potential parking issues, parking in the yard, loud noise is a possibility, those kinds of things. So tools that the residences have, there could also be other issues outside of code's purview, like the noise could also be a DPD issue, parking on the street, things outside of code's purview. But the tools that are at the citizens' disposal would be starting with 311 and 911, reporting those different issues. As they go to the different departments, they would investigate those issues. So for code compliance specifically, the most common, I would say, would be the litter, the potentially noise issues, and parking concerns would be the ones that we see most ordinances that we have already on the books that potentially intersect with the short-term rental issue. Litter is one that we have crews in code compliance in-house to go and abate. Should we find repeat violations, should we find that an owner does not bring their property into compliance voluntarily or after being compelled by a citation, we would go and we would pick up the litter ourselves and charge a fee to that owner, potentially place a lien on that property for that work being done, a litter removal request from code compliance. So that is often a repeat violation, not something that needs to be escalated further than code compliance assessing that charge. Other things like parking, we usually get that addressed, and it's potentially, again, a repeat violation rather than something that just stays and lingers. And then noise, currently code compliance usually does not address any kind of party house noise. That's a DPD concern because of the nature of those complaints.
Right. So I guess my question then is, if generally speaking the complaints are more in DPD's purview or of that nature, then is there a collective file, say, between DPD and the city, or are those considered separate records for the purpose of, say, to give an extreme example, right, of community prosecution getting involved? Are those separate records, or are those considered a common, property record?
Yeah, yes, understood. So in code compliance, I wouldn't have direct record of the 911 calls. However, community prosecution, as you mentioned, that's a team that is collaborative between multiple city departments, including code compliance, Dallas Fire and Rescue, and Dallas Police Department. And those teams specifically, if it needs to be escalated to them, they certainly have 311 and 911 data at their disposal.
Okay, but your record is separate from the DPD record.
Yes, sir, it is separate.
Okay.
Does that answer your question, Mr. Bering?
I think so. Thank you.
Okay, certainly. Other questions from members? Mr. Hall.
Yeah, I just want to make sure that I understood what was sort of explained to us a meeting or so ago, that defining short-term rentals as lodging use. The purpose of that recommendation was not to zone them out of neighborhoods, but to allow compliance, to establish regulations, code compliance regulations that would govern short-term rentals. So for example, that would allow us to start a registration process, collect an annual fee, collect HOT taxes. We could monitor and enforce codes, issues warnings, citations, fines, monthly inspections, potential closures. Am I correct? That's what the initial intent of the recommendation was?
Mr. Doss, I think that may be for you.
Yes.
Thank you. I believe the reasoning for the directive from City Council to define short-term rentals in the lodging use category was intended to place them in that category to give guidance on what districts they should and should not be permitted in. That kind of works alongside of the separate but related registration ordinance, because there are certain things in zoning that we're not necessarily going to regulate because it's not really in the purview of zoning. Let's just use noise, for example. Those items are better regulated in a different section. So the intent, I believe, was to set up a system by which we say, here are the districts where they're permitted and not permitted, here are land use related standards for them, and you also need to comply with the registration ordinance in the form that it takes.
I guess, perhaps I've been naive about this, but I don't think that was made clear to us until maybe the last meeting, that somebody was waiting for this committee to make recommendations on what districts these were allowed in. And we did address that at the last meeting. But that wasn't clear to me until maybe, into the fourth meeting. I was thinking all along that this was more an issue related to enforcement, rules, regulations governing the operations of short-term rentals, and then the subsequent enforcing of those rules and regulations. We already have laws against prostitution, drug use. We have ordinances against parking, regarding parking, trash, noise, things like that. And it all seems to me to come down to an enforcement issue rather than a zoning issue. But I mean, perhaps I'm mistaken about that. I don't personally see what zoning them in or out of any district is. Zoning them out of a district is still an enforcement issue. So, maybe it was not clear in my mind, but everybody else's, that what we were trying to do here. So I'll just leave it at that for the moment. I may have another comment later, but right now, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hall. I will ask one follow-up clarification, if I may, of Mr. King or Mr. Doss, whoever. Is it correct that based on the way that state law works and other ordinances around the state, that for the city to pursue zoning, it needs to be passed as a part of the regulation, and that's why our case report is structured the way it is that both of these are going through together to city council, in that if we adopted regulations before zoning, it would preclude the city's full ability to consider zoning options. Is that correct? I see Mr. Burgess. Thank you, sir.
Hey, good morning. Casey Burgess with the City Attorney's Office. Yeah, so the regulatory piece, the zoning piece are really two separate things. So the zoning is where the use is allowed. The regulatory piece would be more the operation of the business. So ideally, you want to bring those two things to City Council together and have passage at the same time. That's the way it's typically always done. And, you know, there is some question, you know, if you do the regulatory piece before the zoning piece, are you somehow, I guess, giving them the green light throughout the city when you may not have intended to? So that's another good reason to bring them both forward at the same time.
And so for our charge, zoning ordinance, CPC, we're reviewing the zoning component of it, and then separately, the regulations are also being developed, and those will all go to council at the same time. Is that correct?
Absolutely correct.
Thank you, Mr. Burgess. Other questions from members? Well, seeing none. Oh, Commissioner Poppin, my apologies.
I have a question about the different use districts in our appendix discussing where short-term rental would be allowed and not allowed. Finding my way to our appendix. Specifically, I'm wondering why the MU districts weren't included on that table. They are? Why am I missing them?
Is that page
15?
16.
The WMU districts. Excuse me, I might have misspoken. The walkable mixed-use districts that were recently created.
So those are contained in a separate, in Article 13. So we just haven't, because Article 13 and the form districts are kind of this completely different beast, so to speak, we haven't really considered those at all because they're structured in such a different way that we were really focused on the base districts. But of course, if the committee has an opinion and wants to make a determination and make a recommendation, we would of course have to. Actually, we can't really talk about Article 13 because it's not an item on our agenda today. But City Plan Commission could bring that up, and we could add that as an item and discuss it if the Plan Commission wanted to.
So it's akin to Article 10 with the tree ordinance that, you know, certain parts like parking have been included in here because they're already included in these zoning districts, but this is a separate article of the development code altogether. Oh, that's crazy.
Yeah, the form districts, Article 13 is kind of a self-contained zoning code within a zoning code.
So one follow-up, Mr. Doss, depending on what the final action is of this body, for instance, if there was a planned development district that uses a WR as the base, that planned development district could consider this use. If it elected to do so, it would simply not be allowed as a base use. Is that correct? Or a base district use?
That is correct. The PD would, if it wanted to contemplate it, it would need to contemplate it.
And again, outside of this, but just, I guess, there, you know, as we think about how this might be implemented. Thank you.
As a follow-up to that question, regarding PDs and whether lodging uses are already permitted, if there's a PD that wants to make amendments to where lodging uses are allowed, does that then become a separate process to open that for zoning amendment?
No. So this is the fun part, every PD is different. Some of them will say, hey, I follow R7.5 with these 10 exceptions. So unless short-term rental lodging is in that PD already as an exception, if that PD says that I follow R7.5, we're going to go here, we're going to go base code 205, R7.5, short-term rental lodging is not allowed, not allowed. Or in the case of an older PD, that PD may say that residential uses are allowed or lodging uses are not allowed as a category. And in that case, because we have placed short-term rental lodging in that section 205, lodging uses, if it says lodging uses in general are not allowed as a category, there you go. Again, it's every single PD is going to be different, but most PDs, the general statement is that it's going to be what the PD says. If the PD says, I follow R75, there you go. But if that PD says, I follow MF2A, then it's going to be permitted because we've permitted it in MF2A.
Thereby, a PD that does allow lodging uses in certain areas, this new STR definition would fall under lodging uses and then be applicable in those situations.
So again, it depends on the specific language in that PD. If the PD says lodging uses are allowed and goes no further than that and does not specify a specific zoning district that it follows, then yes, it would be allowed because that PD has said, hey, I'm not getting into specific zoning districts. I'm saying all lodging uses are allowed. But most PDs, 95% of them are going to say, I follow the standards of MU2. And then you go to MU2 and you see what's allowed there. And it's going to say we follow MU2 as amended. So then now that we've amended MU2 to allow short-term rental lodging, it's going to be allowed. But the PD, theoretically, a PD could say, I allow lodging uses in general, and then, well, this is a lodging use, so it's allowed. Most of them are not going to say that. Most of them are going to have a specific zoning district that they follow with listed exceptions. So more often than not, you're going to be able to know very quickly, hey, it's based on this zoning district, it's permitted or not. I don't see that being a super common kind of problem that we would hit.
Ms. May, was there a follow-up?
I was just going to speak to the Article 13 question. So Article 13 is our form-based zoning code, and it's structured very differently from Article 4. It does have a provision for accessory uses to refer back to 51A 4.217, which is what we're working on and proposing and amending here. So Article 13 in the accessory uses does call forward to what you're considering. And then also, Article 13 has a paragraph that says the building official is responsible for categorizing all uses, and the way they structure it is like multifamily living, group living. So they have very vague definition of uses, and it gives like examples of permitted uses and examples of prohibited activities, if you will. So it defines it very differently than what we're talking about. So I would definitely agree with Mr. Doss that it doesn't specifically change anything in Article 13 as far as the main use goes, but since the main use is in the lodging category, that the building official probably would kind of go there first to try to categorize a main use of an STR whenever they're considering land uses in Article 13 zoning districts.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Popkin. Mr. McGregor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My question is for code enforcement. What difference, how is enforcement different in the case of home sharing if we create the language defining what, the parameters around home sharing versus the current status quo, not having any language defining it? How does that affect your ability to say, get in on party homes and overproliferation and whatnot?
Thank you for the question. I had one clarification I had to get. Yeah, so presumably, if we went any direction that they are allowed somewhere, short-term rentals are allowed somewhere, code compliance is going to move forward with our proposal as requested by City Council to create a regulations ordinance, right, as has been discussed. So whether they are allowed as an accessory use via home sharing, whether they're allowed everywhere, whether they're only allowed in commercial districts, right, or just only lodging districts, whatever direction we go, there will at some point, unless they're de facto prohibited, if they're allowed somewhere, then those ones that are allowed will have to come register with code compliance. In that registration ordinance, we will be able to create regulations for those use, as we have previously briefed council on some options, additional noise restrictions, additional parking restrictions, potentially noise monitoring devices, right? Things related to the platform. Outside of wherever the zoning does allow them, they will not have to register. That would be then an illegal land use, and our enforcement process would be the same, whether they break a regulation that they're allowed, but they violate a regulation that we come up with, or whether they're not allowed at all. Code compliance would be tasked with addressing that via citations and up with escalated enforcement as necessary.
Is it fair to say that the registration process makes enforcement a little bit easier because you keep track of who's out there versus not, as opposed to having no idea of whether somebody's renting their guest house on a short-term rental basis? I mean,
it would certainly give code compliance a database to go off of and additional regulations to enforce as necessary to hopefully get at some of the concern of the nuisance violations.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. McGregor. Any other questions? Seeing none, is there a motion?
Madam Chair, may I make a comment? Could we vote on the second item first because it will inform the decision on the first item?
Well, we've been discussing them all together, but whatever motion you would like to put forward, well, I guess, and to clarify, Mr. King, is it correct that we could act on both items together since they are related?
Yes, but to ease confusion, Brian King, City Attorney's Office, to ease confusion, it's good if you specify which item. So just if it's DCA 212002, you make your motion as to that item, and then you can make the motion for the second item.
Very well, then. We can take them in whatever order the body would like. We're going to look to you, Mr.
You do it. I'm pulling up my...
I'll take an attempt at making a motion.
All right. Thank you, Commissioner Popkin.
And I'll have some comments if I get a second. We'll just start with the easy one. In the matter of DCA 212-010, consideration of amending chapters 51 and 51A of Dallas Development Code with consideration to be given to amending section 51. Do I need to read this? Accessory uses in section 51A 4.217, accessory uses to define. I move that these are not appropriate zoning amendments and that we do not move forward to this recommendation to City Plan Commission. And in the matter of DCA 21...
One motion at a time, right?
Can I do them both together?
No, one motion at a time. Yeah.
Okay, well, then there we go.
Okay, so we have a motion by Commissioner Popkin, second by Mr. Reeves, in the matter of DCA 212-010 to not follow or to not move forward regulations to City Plan Commission. Discussion. Commissioner Popkin.
Because these are so closely aligned, I feel like my train of thought and reasons for this are really connected to the other motion as well. So I'll try to stick to this one in particular. It does feel to me like the regulatory burden is not something we've excelled at in the past, and I have trouble having faith that we'll be able to regulate this appropriately. I know there may be more opportunities in the future to amend this, as the world continues to change. But at this moment, the highest priority in my mind is keeping as many units as possible available for longer-term rentals, including folks who just need it for a short, long-term time, 30 days. That seems like a more appropriate use in this housing crisis that we have, regardless of how well short-term operators are operating places, and I know there's a lot of great ones. And I just don't, it seems like it's going to be really difficult to regulate this in a satisfactory way that keeps as much housing on the market for long-term residents as possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Poppy. Mr. McGregor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I will not be able to support this motion. I think there's a little bit of conflating between home sharing and STRs, and they're absolutely not the same thing. Home sharing, unlike STRs, will not allow corporate managed properties. By definition, it'll be limited to one unit, and by virtue of the fact that the owner is the operator of that accessory use, I'm very confident that the problem, we'll just throw all the problems into one, the house party problem, but I know there are much more than that. I know those problems are real, but I think that for the most part, if we set this up as home sharing, the house parties will be the exception, not the rule, which seems to be in many cases. More importantly, though, we've heard from many citizens that have testified that they rely on the income from the rentals in a variety of ways and for a number of reasons. One of the most important challenges that Dallas has as a city, and it's well known, is our inability to keep our residents. A recent study showed, it was published in the Dallas Morning News, that while this area in general grew in overall population, the Dallas population shrank. That suggests that Dallas families are fleeing to cities in the periphery where housing is more affordable. That last part is my interpretation of the results. So I am concerned about the impact to the city's economy if as many households as have testified and all those others that did not testify would not be able to rely on that additional income and to stay in the city. A shrinking population is the first indication that a city is in decline. If it continues, we'll eventually see more tangible signs of this decline in terms of, for one thing, deterioration of tax revenue and therefore the quality of services provided by the city and quality of life. I do think that codifying accessory use as home sharing will give the city a better tool to monitor these rentals through the permitting process. If alternatively we don't codify it, tracking down who's renting what in whose home is going to be practically impossible, short of knocking on the door and asking the question. The only, well, I guess I'll stop that. So for those reasons, I don't think it's appropriate to not allow them. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McGregor. Other comments? Mr. Bering.
Yeah, just to briefly echo some of Mr. McGregor's comments, I think home sharing is something different. Obviously, the district court, made the owner-occupied provision, disallowed that rather. But, Dallas has a declining population relative to its surrounding suburbs. We're not competing. And in addition to my experience in working with communities through the VISTA program, I also was a host for a couple of years. And of the folks I hosted, there are now 2 people living in Dallas because I know, in part, they saw a different Dallas. They saw the neighborhoods. They enjoyed getting to know Dallas in a different way. And I believe those stories are by the thousands, So this needs a nuanced solution. It's a complex problem. You can't solve complex problems with broad stroke solutions. So I will not be supporting the motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bering. Mr. Reeves. Oh, Mr. Reeves and Mr. Hall.
Go ahead, Mr. Hall.
I think you're up, Mr. Hall. Oh, can you speak a little bit louder?
Is the motion saying to pass this recommendation on or not pass it on?
So on the first item, or well, we're considering the second item first, which is the accessory use. So 212-101 to not move it forward to city plan, or didn't, I don't know how to say it other than to say recommend denial, which is not the actual language, but that it not be considered, to not recommend consideration to CPC.
Strictly regarding the accessory use.
Correct, accessory use only. We're going to consider the base use separately.
Okay, and we'll come back to 212002 after this. Okay.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Mr. Reeves.
Yes, thanks, Madam Chair. I seconded the motion because we have this thing called the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals. And we had staff brief us today that we cannot require that the operator be the primary resident. That's a quote from our briefing. That's what we were here for. That's what this motion is trying to do. We can call it, we can say record, we can say record, we can say tomato, we can say tomato. It doesn't matter. It violates the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals. So for us to try to move this on is insane because it's going to get struck down. So that's why I seconded this motion.
Thank you, Mr. Reeves. Any other comments? If there's no other first round comments, Commissioner Popkin.
I wanted to add to that briefly that I know there are a lot of great operators, and I hope there's an opportunity to revisit this at another time. But at this point, if allowing great operators means allowing everyone, and there's no backtracking on this decision in the future, it just seems prudent to start small. And I know that does mean shutting down some businesses, but I do want to remind everyone that there is no ban against renting for 30 days or renting for 30 days and someone stays for 29. I mean, we're not saying that you can't have a rental for less than a year. We're just saying that we don't want vacation rentals in and out, on a weekend basis for less than 30 days. But that, in my mind, does not preclude a lot of the uses, a lot of the really great uses that are not entertainment related and vacation related, that allow people to experience neighborhoods, to live in a home while their kitchen's being redone, to be a traveling nurse. A lot of those uses are, very close to 30 days, if not, 60 to 90 day rentals. And so there may be a requirement to tweak some of those business models to fit into a program that is already existing and working well and has a great permit system. But this does not mean that single mothers can't have income because they can't rent their back house. They just might not be able to make as much because it's not a short-term rental anymore. But I think that's a fair price to pay to protect the abundance of actual housing that we need in our city going forward.
Thank you, Commissioner Popkin.
And one more comment, please.
Mr. Bering.
Thank you very much, Chair. I will preface this, a big preface, by saying I'm not an attorney. However, I do have a good bit of knowledge about real estate, and an accessory use as distinct from an owner-occupied provision is tied to the land, it's tied to the property. Every piece of land has a legal description and a legal definition, a legal boundary. So I personally view accessory use language as distinctly different than owner-occupied language. Perhaps we could get an interpretation from the city attorney. However, I think rightfully it ties this use to the property, not to a person, because properties change hands. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bering. Did you want an answer to that question?
Sure.
We're in discussion, so it's a bit past the time, but if it would help provide some clarity.
Yes, this is Brian King. But since this is ZOAC, we're not able to give specific legal advice on that issue, Mr. Bering.
Thank you, Mr. King. So I'm not seeing any other hands, so I'm going to go ahead and call for the vote. I'm going to see if we can do it by voice, and we'll do a record vote if we're not able to track this. So all in favor of the motion that would not move agenda item DCA 212010 forward to Plan Commission, vote aye. Aye.
Aye.
Those opposed?
Nay.
Nay.
So I see 3 in opposition: McGregor, Bering, and Hall. Is that correct?
Correct.
Those in support: Popkin, Blair, Hampton, and Reeves. So the motion prevails 4-3. Okay. Do we have a motion on DCA 212-002? Commissioner Popkin.
Yes, I'll put this forward. In the matter of DCA 212-002, consideration of amending chapters 51 and 51A of the Dallas Development Code, with consideration to be given to amending section 51-4.216.1 lodging uses and section 51A 4.205 lodging uses to define a new use called short-term rental lodging and related regulations. I move to create a purpose statement as written in our document on page 3 that states to establish regulations to protect the health and safety of occupants in short-term rental properties, to protect the integrity of the districts in which short-term rental properties operate, and to preserve the neighborhood character of residential districts within the city, and to minimize adverse impacts to the housing supply caused by the conversion of residential units to transient use. And number 2, follow the previously proposed amendment on page 6 of our docket for section 51A-4.205 lodging uses, except for section 3.8 districts permitted, where I move to delete reference to MF2A, MF2SAH, MF3A, and MF4A, and except for section 3E4, the section for multifamily, MF2, MF3, MF4, where I move to remove this section completely and therefore treat these zoning districts the same as single family. Then in Appendix 2, the use table on page 15 of our docket, in the residential districts section, delete P, permitted by right, in the lodging or boarding house column for MF2A, MF2SAH, MF3A, and MF4A rows. I have comments if I have a second.
I'm going to ask one clarification that I think our city attorney and staff, is it correct we don't need to reference 15 because that provision is covered within the section B of our uses? Thank you. So thank you for helping us track it in the motion, but I think your item 4.2053B will cover that intent. Thank you, Commissioner
Removes it
Popkin.
from the
And
appendix.
did I see a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Reeves. Discussion, Commissioner Popkin.
In consideration of this really difficult decision, and in the effort to continue this conversation at Plan Commission and Council, the one motivation that keeps sticking in my head is that I know through personal experience, maybe this isn't data, but that having the income from short-term rentals is a strong incentive for property owners to rent through STRs rather than longer-term rentals. And in smaller cities that I've watched where STRs are made illegal, suddenly there's so much more housing and it's so much more affordable. And when STRs are available in primarily residential neighborhoods, suddenly it's hard to find rental housing and it's so much more expensive. And I feel like opening this floodgate or small gate will in 5 or 10 years snowball into a much bigger issue than we imagined it might, because simply the economics are there and we are all savvy business people and there's an opportunity here. I know there's a lot of great operators that appreciate and do a wonderful job with the more qualitative aspects of hosting people who come to our city for an amazing experience. And I value that, and I've really wrestled with this because of that. That plays a really important role in our community. But I see, I don't know, I see the value of providing more units for more long-term use as outweighing that heavily. Because I already own my home, I feel like I'm in. And I don't want to be saying, screw the rest of you guys, you'll never be able to buy a house. But I feel like for a lot of folks that I know, they're sitting in that position wondering if they'll ever be able to buy a house. And I do think that the potential for a small corporation or a single mom or anyone to buy an STR and, buy a single family house and turn it into an STR, or by that matter, have an entire complex or part of a complex as STRs, really impacts our availability of housing and the pricing of that housing so drastically that I just can't justify it in my head. There may be more appropriate places for STRs, and I really do think that there is a great opportunity for STRs to be in mixed-use districts. That's why I wanted to ask about the walkable mixed-use areas. And we're continuing to allow STRs in office districts, commercial, and a lot of areas where it fits in well, especially these mixed-use neighborhoods. And there are a lot of PDs where it may be allowed as well. But the areas of town where we've decided we want that mix of use, we as a community, as a city as a whole, have decided this is where we want commercial uses, this is where we want mix of uses. It offers the transportation and the outdoor dining and, different other amenities that visitors need and appreciate. And we should be creating more of those. We shouldn't, I think there's a huge opportunity, and I'd really love to steer this energy and this desire to meet a great need in our market to the right types of areas and really create vibrant districts where that fits in well. So that's my motion. I hope you'll support it. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Popkin. Mr. McGregor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I, of course, will not be able to support this motion. It has been said many times that this is a complex issue, and this idea and tacking on to the simple solution, I think, is really not simple but simplistic. This ordinance fails to consider the negative impact that it may have for the overall economy of the city. I'm not going to repeat what I said at the last motion, but there are many people who rely, individuals, small and good operators who rely on that income needed in order to be able to afford living here. I completely understand and heard the concerns. In fact, I've seen them because I have friends that live next door to SDRs. They send me videos. I understand that concern is valid and true. The way to deal with that concern is with proper regulation, not by just throwing everything out. Too simplistic, completely not a good ordinance, from my view. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. McGregor. Other comments? Well, I will, Mr. Hall.
Yeah, just to get on the record, I completely support what Committee Member McGregor just said. I think we're trying to put a very simple solution to a very complex problem, and I don't think we're addressing the complex problem. If zoning things, if changing a zoning definition of a short-term rental creates regulations and policing authority and so forth, great. To put people out of business that are providing a service that people obviously want, I don't think that's right. I'll just leave it at there. I think relying on a simple solution is naive, but thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hall. So I will be supporting the motion. You know, I agree with everything that Commissioner Popkins said about the impact to our city's housing stock. I also agree with Mr. McGregor. There are good operators. I think all of us have likely either know or we've clearly heard testimony from folks. I think it's also very clear that the ruling from the Fifth Circuit has precluded a lot of the options that many of us have traditionally utilized to help ensure compatibility. I do hope that this conversation continues, but I do think that it is important that we move this issue forward. It is going to continue to have robust discussion. It has been under consideration for 2 years, and I think it's time for this body to move this to the next step. And I see Commissioner Blair.
Unlike me, I've been very quiet. Oh, I hear someone laughing at me. Because this has been hard, and not only is it hard to say yes or no, it also depends on the area of the city in which you're saying yes and no to. When you see good operators like Mr. Hall and Mr. McGregor has said that any decision not to move it forward would put them out of business. When you come to other areas of the city where STRs are used as drug houses, brothels, and you'll have someone come in and over a weekend cook their meth, make their drugs, move on. Police can't catch up to them because they're only there for a weekend, for 3 days, for 2 days. They come in and it becomes a place to sell. I know what that looks like because it's in my district. And when we start talking about quality of life, you can't say yes to one area and no to a different area. I've had residents who know we're discussing this come to me because they know I sit on ZOAC and say, Lori, they don't even say commissioner, they say, Lori, please help us. That my kids can't go outside. My kids can't have a quality of life. I can't have a quality of life, and I can't afford in this new market to sell my house. I can't sell it because no one wants to buy it. I can't buy because I can't afford. My house, when I bought my house, was less than 100. Now, if I could find a buyer, if I can get a fair market price, I can't go and afford a $300,000 house. What do you say to those that can't have the quality of life, that can't have fair housing, who you can't get the police to catch them because by the time you call 911 and 911 sends it to the appropriate detective, it's weeks down the line and they have moved 5 times. When you live down the street from one of those, it's not fair. So I'm asking, and I am supporting Commissioner Popkins' motion. I ask that those that have good ones, I thank you for being a good operator, but overall, residential use is for residential use. It's not for business uses. And thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Blair. Any other comments? Seeing none, all those in favor of moving the motion forward, DCA 212-002, with the amendments to item 3B, multifamily districts, and striking item 3E, Romanet 4. All those in favor say, and including the purpose statement, excuse me, all those in favor say aye. 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 Those opposed say nay.
Nay.
So three statement for McGregor, Hall, Bering opposed, Popkin, Blair, Hampton, and Reeve in favor. Motion passes 4-3. So, other matters. Minutes. And we have 2 sections of minutes. All of us received, or I will also thank you for everyone. I know we still have members of the public who are here. Thank you for being with us today. On our other matters, revised meeting minutes from August 30th, 2022. Those were distributed. Mr. Doss, could you quickly explain the revisions that were made and why those are back before us?
Thank you. So the revisions were made. There were some edits that were made by staff that were not caught in the kind of final preparation. Most of it is editorial structural. There are a couple things. So for example, on page 2 of the amended minutes, motion number 1, there was in the motion was to add in the MF1A, MF1SAH districts to the permitted. That did not get caught. That was in the motion. It was in the motion. We clarified that it was intended for those to be in the motion, but that didn't make it into the minutes.
So this is really just bringing it in consistent with the action that was taken by the body and technical cleanup.
That's correct.
Okay. So
yes.
Any other amendments to the August 30th, 2022 minutes as revised? Okay. Seeing none, is there a motion?
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. McGregor. Second, Commissioner Blair. All in favor, say, or any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, so revised August 30th minutes are adopted, and we now have consideration of the meeting minutes from September 13th, 2022. Are there any corrections to the minutes? Seeing none, is there a motion to accept the minutes?
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. McGregor. Thank you, Commissioner Blair, for your second. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Motions are adopted. We have no other agenda items today. Our meeting is adjourned at 11:56 a.m. Thank you all for being here today. Thank you, staff, for excellent service and all the updates. And we will see everyone at our next meeting.
Thank you.
Thank you.